the number one national security issue for the US and Israel is the future of the Ayatollah regime in Iran. The only way to minimize conflicts in the Middle East is by uprooting the current regime. If the US were to procure the intelligence it receives from Israel on its own, then the US would have to establish 5 CIAs.
All right, folks, Yishai Fleischer here. Prime Minister Netanyahu is on the way to the United States, not to Washington, but to Mar A Lago. There in Florida, he's going to meet with President Trump for the 5th time during Trump's presidency, this presidency in any case. And what are they going to talk about? Are they going to talk about striking Iran? Are they going to talk about Trump's relationship with Qatar? Are they going to talk about what's the future of Gaza? Is it going to become, a great resort, or is it going to become a haven for jihadism? What about Yemen and their rockets, Somaliland, and the tensions in the area between the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea? There's a lot to discuss in the upcoming meeting. What is it really going to be all about? Well, we have with us an expert on U.S.-Israel relations. Yoram Ettinger is a retired ambassador who was in charge of Israel's relations with the U.S. Congress. He's an expert on U.S.-Israel relations, Middle East affairs, and regional demographics as well. Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my privilege.
Okay, are you excited about this trip, or do you think this is like humdrum? We've seen it all before, another picture-taking opportunity. What is this thing about?
Well, it's another visit to Washington, or in this case to Florida. But any visit by Prime Minister to the US is a very critical visit, especially at this time. You mentioned different topics which might be discussed. One can add also the future of what is misperceived as US foreign aid to Israel, which in fact is an investment in Israel, which yields back to America a very, very lavish return on investment of at least a few 100%. I assume this will also be discussed. But my own hope is that the Prime Minister will dwell primarily on the number one national security issue for the US and Israel, which is the future of the Ayatollah regime in Iran.
Okay, so Israel, in a joint strike with the United States, bombed the nuclear capacity, the nuclear development capacity of Iran. They struck also at the surface to air missile complex. And, it seemed like it was a big victory. And certainly Prime Minister Netanyahu counts it for himself as a giant victory. And the people who talk about miracles talk about the amazing miracles that took place on that day. And yet Iran is rebuilding, and they're saber rattling, and they're pushing ahead with striking Israel again. What's the deal? Was that past a success? We have the B-2 bomber photo, we have the B-2 bomber mezuzah. Okay, but it looks like the malacha lo nigmara, the job was not finalized, finished. It was not fully taken care of.
Certainly, in the Middle East, the June battles was another round in the ongoing war against the Ayatollah regime. And anyone who assumes that the war was decided in June ignores the reality in the Middle East, and maybe even ignores a few certain precedents. For instance, the precedent of Israel versus Egypt 6 Days War. During that 6 Days War, June 67, Israel obliterated completely the Egyptian military infrastructure. However, Egypt, with the help of then the Soviet Union, became preoccupied 24/7 in not only restoring but upgrading its capabilities. And within less than half a year, it launched war of attrition against Israel, which lasted for 3 years with heavy toll of Israeli losses, in fact, paving the road to the very costly Yom Kippur War, 1973 war. Currently, the Ayatollah regime, just like Egypt in 67, together with China, North Korea, as well as Russia, is preoccupied 24/7 restoring its capabilities, most importantly, the ballistic capabilities, production, as well as receiving from China supply of ballistic missiles. But most importantly, we're talking about new generation of missile, hypersonic missiles. And anyone who was very concerned about the price paid by Israel in June due to the ballistic missiles hitting Israel should know with hypersonic ballistic missiles, the June cost would be dwarfed. Not only is that an Israeli concern, but restored capabilities in Tehran, upgraded capability in Tehran could mean do or die for every single pro American Arab regime, most notably Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, as well as Jordan, Egypt, and all the way to Morocco. The assumption that we finished the job in June is completely divorced from the Iranian reality, Middle East reality, and my own lesson learning from the precedents is that it's time for the US and Israel to preempt rather than react.
Okay, so two big questions on that. First thing is, you mentioned China and you mentioned the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War was a war between Israel and the Arab states, but it was also a proxy war between the US and the Soviet Union. Are we in a proxy war situation where China, nobody's ever named China an enemy, and yet I think twice when you talk about Iran, you spoke about the fact that China is arming Iran, rearming Iran, and empowering it to strike at Israel. Well, I doubt that China has got like anti-Semitic or anti-Israel aspects to it, but does have certainly anti-West. Israel is seen as part of the alliance of the West, part of the U.S. alliance, is now therefore a target by China. Is that a fair thing to say that China is fighting a war against Israel, against America through Israel?
Well, China is pursuing Chinese interest. In June, the Chinese strategic posture in the world received or was afflicted by a severe blow. While most people look at June as an Iranian Israeli war with US involvement, that war dealt both China and Russia, as well as North Korea, a severe blow because not only did the Israeli Air Force pave the road for an unimpeded American assault on the three major nuclear centers in Iran, but in June, the Israeli Air Force operation exposed major weaknesses, vulnerabilities of advanced Chinese and Russian military systems, most notably air defenses. Those weaknesses discovered or exposed by Israel, the information about them has been shared with the US, and realizing that similar Chinese and Russian advanced military systems are deployed throughout the globe, that Israeli operation has tilted the balance of power in favor of the US against China, against Russia, which today has energized Russia, China, and North Korea
Mm.
to restore and upgrade Iranian capabilities in order to prove that their strategic posture has not been eroded. Obviously, the outcome would have a major regional and global impact, and therefore, both the US and Israel should not be passive in view of the process of restoring Iranian air defenses, ballistic capabilities, and nuclear infrastructure.
Yoram Ettinger, you are advocating, you're saying, look, Iran is being rearmed with better stuff so that they won't be embarrassed again and so that the Chinese and the Russians won't be embarrassed again. You're saying that the prime minister should head out to meet Trump at Mar A Lago and talk about a preemptive strike. Two problems. One, Netanyahu is not a preemptive strike guy. We know that. We know that he's not a guy, he's had successes in this 2-year war, but we know that he's a prime minister who has not finished the job vis-a-vis Hamas and who has not finished the job vis-a-vis Iran. You're talking about regime change. He had an opportunity to do it, didn't do it. So that's one challenge. And the other one, I heard you talking about this on Channel 14. President Trump is surrounded. Not everybody in President Trump's team is on board this idea of understanding the Iranian danger or the Qatari danger or the Chinese danger in this situation. They're just not right there. Maybe there's a Marco Rubio. Maybe he's on the side of strike hard, strike first, strike hard. But many other players in the circle of President Trump are not like that. So how do you overcome these two challenges, given the problem that you're putting out there about Iranian rearmament?
Well, this should be the challenge facing the prime minister when he lands in Florida and when he enters the room for one or two or three meetings with President Trump, and focusing not on Israel's interests, but focusing on America's own interests. People around Trump, and maybe the president himself, are deluding themselves that the Iranian threat has to do with the Persian Gulf, Middle East, maybe some parts of Africa. The reality is that Iran is very deeply entrenched in South America, Central America, along the US Mexico border. And according to FBI and Homeland Security Department's Threat Assessment 2026, they point at a growing network of Iranian controlled Islamic terrorist sleeper cells on US soil. And certainly, and restored Iranian capabilities is going to impact homeland security right there in the United States. But more importantly, we're talking about large number of people around Trump, those who belong to the isolationist movement within the Republican Party. Some say that one of Trump's children, sons as well, and they assume that the name of the game is basically transactional game. You sit down with the Ayatollah regime and you discuss it as you discuss any other business transaction. Uh, 47 years of the Ayatollah regime has proven that while Western negotiators assume that money talks, the Ayatollah regime insists that ideology walks, and they have proven themselves to consider ideology much more important than the hundreds of billions of dollars which have been showered upon them, mostly by the US as well as by other Western powers. Some presidents, including the current one, Trump, have assumed that economic sanctions could do the job, could induce the Ayatollahs to moderate themselves. But again, we're talking about 47 years of economic sanctions. Jimmy Carter, who was the president who made the catastrophic mistake by ushering in Ayatollah Khomeini and stabbing the back of the Shah of Iran, once he realized how critical his mistake was, he imposed economic sanctions on the Ayatollah regime. President Trump imposed on the Ayatollah regime during his first term maximum pressure economic sanctions. But we know now, based on the 47 years of experience, economic sanctions are reversible. Increasingly, they're bypassable by the Ayatollah regime through Russia, through China, through Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and through some of the Europeans who, away from the limelight, do trade with the Ayatollah regime. So 47 years have proven that the diplomatic option, negotiation option, and economic sanctions do not deliver the goods. It's time to realize that if the president wants to advance his justifiable goal of minimizing and preventing wars, hopefully ending wars, you cannot minimize wars when the chief epicenter of war, terrorism, and drug trafficking is around, and that is the Ayatollah regime. And the only way to minimize conflicts and drug trafficking and terrorism in the Middle East, but most importantly, throughout the world, including Latin America, is by uprooting the current regime. What I
Okay,
hear, what I hear
but
in Washington is that there is no appetite for regime change, and they go back to the precedents of Afghanistan and Iraq. Anyone who lumps together Iran on the one hand with Afghanistan and Iraq proves proves detachment from the region, because ethnically, historically, religiously, and most importantly, as far as cohesion of the population, you cannot talk about Iran and Afghanistan and Iraq in the same way. Moreover, the US proved itself able to introduce regime change in Iran already back in 1953, when they restored the regime of the Shah of Iran. And then again in 1978 79, when they stabbed the back of the Shah and ushered in the Ayatollah regime. So the US has been able to orchestrate regime change. Now it's the time to do it for the sake of most Iranians, but even more importantly, for the sake of regional and global sanity.
okay, but you didn't answer me, Yoram Ettinger, about you made your case that America's got to engage for their own safety. Okay, and for global safety. On the other hand, you also admitted that there are a lot of Americans who just don't have that appetite. They can say whatever they want about what it's like, that they don't want to enter this war or that war, like you said, Afghanistan and Iraq. But bottom line is, you got to have that you got to have the energy to want to engage in global battles to keep the world afloat. These isolationists, they are, I like to call them, by the way, not isolationists, but U.S. shrinkers. They're interested in a smaller. They're interested in downgrading the empire of the United States and not engaging anymore. So therefore, becoming a smaller country. But you didn't mention, though, you did not answer the other part of this equation, which is Israel. At the end, it was Israel who really attacked Iran a few months ago. It was the U.S. was on board. It assisted, but it was an Israeli strike. And my question to you is, and I asked you before, Netanyahu, is he a first strike guy? He doesn't look like a first strike guy from my experience, from my understanding of how he operates. You think he's ready to deal with this? On the other hand, to argue with myself, he's been concerned with Iranian nuclear capability for the last 25 years. This has been one of his like mantras and key concerns. But do you think he's coming to after he's shown that he was not able to defeat Hamas in toto, was not able to fulfill his promise to eradicate them? You think now he has the gumption to get in and have a first strike against Iran and go for the big regime change option?
Well, in June, the prime minister proved his capability to preempt the ballistic offensive planned by Iran. In many respects, he also preempted Nasrallah in Lebanon. It's true that there were many, maybe probably thousands of missiles landing on in Israel before we hit Nasrallah. But the dimension of the offensive on Nasrallah, in a way, shocked many observers in Israel, in the Middle East, and in the US. Currently, we are talking about an issue which should concern Americans and Israelis. It should concern for maybe even one critical reason: for the US to announce publicly its claim that there's no appetite for US initiative of regime change is not only a slap in the face of most Iranians who want this regime out, but also it's a major tailwind to the Ayatollahs in their pursuit of the toppling of every single pro American Arab regime. But most importantly, allowing the current regime to remain in power because supposedly there's no appetite, and I've never heard of any constructive national security which is based on appetite. You don't advance national security because you have or you don't have appetite. But if you are not going to change the regime in Iran, most probably you are going to pave the road not only for Iranian nuclear power, but unlike North Korea, unlike Russia, unlike the US, unlike Pakistan, unlike China, this is going to be the first nuclear apocalyptic regime in human history. And
Mhm.
to have an apocalyptic regime in the shape of the Ayatollah regime becoming nuclear would mean devastating, catastrophic cost, which would dwarf any cost of currently trying to cause a regime change. So it's time for the isolationists to wake up from their wishful thinking, which has nothing to do with global reality or Middle East reality, and realize if you don't face up Islamic terrorism in its own trenches, you'll end up facing them in your own trenches in New York, in Chicago, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, as well as Dallas, Houston, and Miami. And once again, the cost could dwarf the September 11 cost of the Twin Towers in New York.
Yoram Ettinger, we have our own jihadist regime right next door in Gaza. They still control 47% of it. Of course, I'm talking about the Islamic Brotherhood's wing called Hamas. They were hurt, most of their commanders killed. They were struck very hard. And Israel has taken control of 53% of Gaza. Uh, and yet, this sandbox of 400 square kilometers on Israel's southwestern border and coast continues to exist. This evil regime is still there, and we have not destroyed it. And really, if you speak to Arabs, there's some Arabs who say, "Wow, we don't want to start with Israel. Look what happens." And then other Arabs say, "Well, no, you weren't able to get rid of this organization. It's still there, and it's still certainly controlling many people's lives." So, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going down to Mar A Lago. And Mar A Lago is Florida. There's a lot of Miami, South Beach has a lot of tall, beautiful buildings. It's shiny. It's got the intercoastal. It's got the beautiful Atlantic there. It's got the Keys. And says President Trump, hey, we could turn Gaza into the Riviera. We could turn it into the Florida Keys over there into South Beach. And we have this plan, the Sunrise Plan. Is it realistic? What is Netanyahu going to do in this meeting to talk about getting rid of Hamas and making Gaza beautiful again?
One of the keys to the resolution of the Gaza issue, and probably the major key, goes back to Tehran, because Gaza or Hamas in Gaza is only one of the tentacles of the venomous octopus headquartered in Tehran. There is the Gaza tentacle, there is the Hezbollah tentacle, there is the Houthi tentacle, there are the drug cartels of Mexico tentacles, there are the terrorist training camps in the tri border area of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil, and many other tentacles. You want to resolve the challenge or the problem of Gaza, you have first and foremost to deal with the head of the octopus rather than chase the tentacles of that octopus. Moreover, Gaza is contiguous to the Sinai Peninsula. Sinai Peninsula has been a major arena of Islamic terrorists, some controlled by Iran, some controlled by ISIS, some by the Muslim Brotherhood, some by Palestinians. There's no way that you can end terrorism in Gaza while there is ongoing terrorism contiguous to Gaza, and it all goes back to the head of that octopus. And it's time to stop dealing with the octopus in Tehran diplomatically or economically. It's time to realize, as far as they are concerned in Tehran, they are determined. They are determined to be driven by a fanatic 1400-year-old ideology which mandates them to do away with what they call the apostate Sunni regimes and then turn to the infidel West and primarily the great American Satan. They also attack Israel, but their attack on Israel is driven primarily by their realization that we are the number one vanguard of the US in the Middle East. Weakening Israel, as far as they're concerned, is going to weaken the great American Satan. And this is a mutual threat to both the US and Israel.
Yoram, one last issue that I want to talk about, and that is the memorandum of understanding. $3 billion gets transferred to Israel. You're going to talk about it, I'm sure. It's certainly not aid, it is joint defense development, but it's been called aid. And there's been a lot of people who are calling for that money to stop flowing in that way because it looks like foreign aid. Israel doesn't need foreign aid. Israel's got a $500 billion yearly GDP. It doesn't need foreign aid. And yet we still have this thing, and that's the way it's perceived. And all the anti Israel folks on the left and on the right, they're always talking about this issue of America funding Israel. Okay, what is Prime Minister Netanyahu going to do about it? What should he do about it? What is the right way forward vis-a-vis the memorandum of understanding? Should Israel stop receiving aid altogether? Should Israel change the name of this thing to a joint defense development fund? Or should it really just, okay, let's go free market? You want to buy something, buy it. You want to sell it, sell it. You want to create a lab to study something together, let's just do it that way. But how do we get this accusation off our back? Is Prime Minister Netanyahu heading in that direction?
The substance of what is erroneously called foreign aid, the substance has to do with advanced military systems without which Israel probably would not be able to face the national security challenges which we face today, most notably the F 35, the F 16, the F 15 missile launchers, etc. However, the misperception has to do with the notion that this is a one-way street. US gives and Israel receives. And we hear certain voices also from the right which say, what do we get in return for U.S. generosity. Well, the reality has been reflected by the Israeli use of the F-35, and this is only one of multitude of examples. Israel receives the F-35 from the U.S., for which we must be extremely grateful. However, we receive it as the number one battle tested laboratory of the manufacturers, Lockheed Martin. We receive it as the number one innovation center of battle tactics for the US Air Force. When Israel received that plane, we were the first one in the world to receive it for operational use. That project, that program, the F-35 program, was considered to be a bane rather than boon. And people were talking about waste of mega billion dollars invested in F-35. There were major technical and mechanical glitches. However, the battle tested Israeli laboratory overcame, if not all the glitches, the vast majority of them, and the proof is in the pudding. Since 2019, the graph of export of the F-35 has zoomed upward. And it is zoomed upward because there has been a showroom for the F-35. The Chinese and the Russian, the British, the French, they all claim they have better combat aircraft than the F-35. All they can present is very, very impressive pamphlets and very interesting, instructive simulation games. Lockheed Martin F-35, F-16, Boeing the F-15, they don't need pamphlet. They don't need simulation games. They have a showroom, namely the Israeli Air Force. This year alone, according to Lockheed Martin, we're talking about $40 billion export of F-35. We're talking about $170 billion, which are orders for further export.
Mhm.
I would be very conservative saying it's not only because of Israel. Let's be very conservative. 50% because of the only operational Air Force showrooming the qualities, the major advantage of F-35. If we're
This is
talking
this is
about
this is a
uh,
fabulous argument you're making. You're making an excellent argument. I've never heard that argument. It's a
and
very
you,
interesting
and you
argument.
compare that to $3.8 billion annual foreign aid, we're talking right there, many hundreds of percent return on investment. But that's only one element because we also share with the US intelligence. Former Chief of Air Force Intelligence, General George Keegan, when he was asked by the New York Times to explain what do we get from Israel as far as intelligence, his response, the chief of Air Force intelligence, was if the US were to procure the intelligence it receives from Israel on its own, then the US would have to establish 5 CIAs. Currently, annual budget of the CIA is about $15 billion. Namely, we're talking about roughly 400% return on investment if Israel's intelligence is worth only one CIA. But to be realistic, we do provide the US what would take a few CIAs, so we are close to 1,000% return on investment. And then the issue of the location. Former chief of naval operations, Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, said already back in the 1970s that Israel resembles the largest American aircraft carrier, which does not require a single American on board, cannot be sunk, and is deployed in the most critical area for America's economy and America's homeland and national security. And if there were not Israel, then the US would have to manufacture few more real aircraft carriers, accompanied by a few ground divisions. Today, one advanced aircraft carrier costs between 10 and 13 billion dollars, which means that by itself is already 340% on.
And yet, Yoram, and these are excellent arguments, but still, and you just spent a month in America, that that's not the prevailing mood. Okay, so you got politics is also about mood. It's about these are excellent arguments, but somehow they have not been accepted. So I'm asking you, Netanyahu, is he going to come up with a different way to promote this thing? Maybe a different. I say that it should never be called foreign aid. Technically, it should come out of a different kitty, out of some kind
Absolutely.
of some
Absolutely.
kind
It
of
should be
some
part of defense cooperation,
right.
military defense cooperation, intelligence, industrial. You can ask, and there are many other examples, but you can ask yourself, Israel has no American military bases. We do get advanced military system. We don't get cash. We do get advanced military systems worth 3.3 billion dollars plus 500 million dollars more for U.S. Israeli research in the ballistic missile area. What have we produced for the US when we bombed Iran in June, paving the road for the American bombing, which was unimpeded because of Israel? What did we produce for the US when we bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor back in 81 and spared the US potential nuclear confrontation in the first Gulf War of 1991? And there are many, many such examples. And then you put side by side with Israel, no military bases, $3.8 billion, and then you shift to West Europe, almost 100,000 American soldiers, $35 billion annually. What exactly does the US get from the feeble NATO alliance, from the feeble European countries compared to what it gets every single day from Israel? One example to conclude this chapter and probably the program. I was waiting for my meeting with one of the senators at the Hart Senate office building in Washington. And in walked an active duty colonel, introducing himself commander of a special operations American battalion. And when he heard that I was from Israel, he said, I only have two words to say to you. Thank you. What are you thanking me for? I asked him. And he said, well, I just returned with my battalion from a year of service in Iraq. On the way to Iraq, we went through Israel. And for 2 weeks, we were trained by Israel's top experts on facing suicide bombers, car bombs, and the deadly IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. And much of the credit to the fact that we came back without a single fatality is due to those 2 weeks. And then he concluded by saying he spends much of the year going around the world training special operation forces of America's allies. There's only one country, said, where he does not train, but is trained, and that's Israel. And that's, he said, your added value to my country. No other ally of the US can render these services to the US, and those services worth many, 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 many times more than the $3.8 billion. It does injustice to America and Israel to define it as foreign aid. It should be part of defense budget, defense cooperation, defense research and development, military development, enhancement of military battle tactics, which Israel has been doing all along for the US, but never receiving credit for that.
Yoram Ettinger, excellent arguments, and I hope that they are heard. And I hope that we take the opportunity to fight our enemies right now and to defeat them. The war is far from over. We're in a kind of hudna. We're in a kind of little stoppage right now on both sides. It's raining in the Middle East, but the war continues against Iran, against Qatar, against China, Russia, North Korea, all these players. You've laid it out for us. Yoram Ettinger is a retired ambassador who was in charge of Israel's relations with the U.S. Congress. He is an expert on U.S.-Israel relations, Middle Eastern affairs, and regional demographics. Yoram, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, you are listening to Yishai Fleischer, broadcasting live from Judea to the world. Of course, with all of the efforts to fight the bad guys and alliances, strategic alliances. Let's not forget the big alliance that we have, which is with the God of Israel, who protects the Jewish people, who we serve, we pray to, and continues to help the Jewish people traverse throughout history and to work with allies, fight enemies, and continue to survive another day in order to bring God's glory into this world. So I want to bless you guys wherever you are. Stay tuned, stay strong, stay connected. Don't forget that you can support our efforts here at Yishai Fleischer TV, where we bring you such experts as Yoram Ettinger, who gives us such a clear picture. You could support us by going to fightforisrael.org. Fight, the number 4, fightforisrael.org, where we have beautification projects, get tractors for Israeli farmers, and strengthen the land of Israel and the land of Israel's narrative. And of course, through buymeacoffee.com/Yishai, you could buy me a coffee. And that coffee gives me energy. It helps with my little energy bar to keep fighting the fight. And me and my team, we continue to broadcast the story of Israel to the world. So that's it. God bless you wherever you are. Keep strong, keep connected, keep part of the story. God bless you from the land of blessings, and shalom.